Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Tonight we're going deep into the Appalachian Mountains with 8 new most disturbing true deep woods horror stories. These stories come from mail carriers, power workers, and truck drivers who saw things in the dark forests that shouldn't exist. Each story happened in places where cell phones don't work and help is hours away. These tales come from real reports and recordings that were hidden away. If you're new here, hit subscribe for scary true stories every day. Ring that bell so you never miss when we explore the darkest corners of America. Now let's head into Appalachia's scariest places, where the trees are so thick you can't see the sky and things live in the shadows that were never meant to be found. My name is Carl Henderson, and I've been delivering mail in West Virginia for 12 years. Started right out of high school when my dad got me the job at the Postal Service. I know every street, every dog, every crazy customer in 3 counties. I've delivered in blizzards, ice storms, and floods. Nothing stops the mail, that's what they taught us. But what happened last spring in Deadwood Hollow made me question everything I thought I knew about my job. I've always been the guy they call when routes get tough. When other carriers call in sick or quit, I'm the one who steps up. The supervisors know I'll get the mail delivered no matter what. That's how I ended up covering Jerry Millfield's route for 3 weeks straight. Jerry was a 20-year veteran, tough as nails. He'd been running the Deadwood Hollow route for 8 years without missing a single day. Then one Monday morning, he called in sick. Then Tuesday. By the 3rd week, the postmaster was getting calls from angry residents demanding their mail. Jerry wouldn't answer his phone, wouldn't come to the door when supervisors went to check on him. Nobody else wanted to take that route. The other carriers would make excuses or suddenly remember they had doctor appointments. Finally, the postmaster pulled me aside. "Carl, I need someone reliable. Jerry's route is 50 miles round trip, mostly through forest. Pays double time for the extra miles." I should have asked why everyone was so scared of a simple rural route. The drive to Deadwood Hollow started normal enough. Interstate for 20 minutes, then state highway for another 15. But once I turned onto County Road 47, everything changed. The road got narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. Trees crowded in on both sides. Thick old oaks and maples that must have been growing for 100 years. My postal truck felt small on that winding gravel road. The GPS on my dashboard kept saying, recalculating every few minutes. Cell towers don't reach into these deep woods, so my phone showed no service after the 1st mile. The trees got thicker as I drove deeper, branches meeting overhead like a tunnel. Even though it was noon on a bright spring day, it felt like dusk under that canopy. The silence was the worst part. No traffic, no aircraft, no distant highway noise, just my truck engine and the crunch of gravel under my tires. Sometimes I'd hear a bird call, but it always sounded wrong somehow. Too sharp, too long. 8 miles into the woods, I reached the first mailbox. Morrison family, the route sheet said. 4 residents. Simple delivery, some bills and a package from Amazon. I grabbed my mail bag and walked up the dirt driveway to a small white house with green shutters. A woman answered my knock. Mid-30s, brown hair, pleasant smile. 3 kids peeked out from behind her legs, all under 10 years old. Normal family scene, except something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. "Mail delivery," I said, holding out the package. "Thank you so much," she replied, reaching for it. When her hand touched mine, it felt ice cold. Not just cool from being inside, actually cold, like she'd been holding ice cubes. The cold went right through me, made my teeth chatter for a second. I pulled my hand back fast. "Everything all right?" she asked, still smiling. "Yeah, just cold out here in the shade." It wasn't cold. It was 70 degrees. The 3 kids kept staring at me. Not normal kid curiosity. They didn't blink, didn't fidget, didn't move at all. Just stood there watching me with the same pleasant expression as their mother. I got back to my truck feeling unsettled. Checked my route sheet for the next address, Johnson family, about a mile down the road. But when I looked at the sheet again, it says, Davidson family. I blinked and looked once more. Johnson family. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. The second house was bigger, painted yellow with a wraparound porch. The mailbox said Johnson family, 5 residents. I had mail for them too, mostly junk and a credit card offer. As I walked to the front door, I could see people moving around inside through the windows. I counted them without thinking about it. 7 people, 2 adults in the kitchen, 5 others in what looked like a living room. A man answered the door before I could knock. Average height, brown hair, friendly face. He looked familiar somehow, but I couldn't place where I might have seen him before. "Mail for the Davidsons," I said, reading from the envelope. His smile never changed. "We've always been the Johnsons," he said with complete certainty. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. It clearly said Davidson. But when I looked again, it said Johnson. The same handwriting, same ink, same everything, just different letters. "Sorry about that," I mumbled, handing over the mail. "Long day." "No problem at all. We appreciate you covering Jerry's route." "You know Jerry?" "Oh yes, Jerry's been our mail carrier for years. Sweet man. Hope he feels better soon." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. The way he said "sweet man" sounded wrong. Too familiar, too personal. I was walking back to my truck when I caught my reflection in the side mirror. For just a second, my face looked blurry, like I was looking through water. I blinked hard and looked again. Normal reflection, just tired eyes and a 5 o'clock shadow. The third house belonged to the Peterson family. 3 residents listed, but I saw 4 people through the front window. The woman who answered the door had the same brown hair as the first woman, the same friendly smile. Her features were different, but something about the bone structure looked identical. "Peterson family?" I asked. "That's right. Peterson family. We've always been the Petersons." There it was again. That same phrase. "We've always been the Johnson." We've always been the Petersons. Like they were reading from the same script. The 4th house was when I started to panic. The family name on the mailbox was Williams, but my route sheet said Carter. When I mentioned it, the man who answered said, "We've always been the Williams family," in the exact same tone as the others. Same inflection, same certainty. And his face. It was definitely different from the Johnson man. Different nose, different eye color. But the basic structure was identical. Like they were all related, or all molded from the same clay. I sat in my truck for 5 minutes after that delivery, staring at my route sheet. The names kept shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. Johnson became Davidson, became Carter, became Williams. My own handwriting, changing itself. My hands were shaking when I started the engine. 3 more houses to go, each one worse than the last. The 5th house had a family that looked exactly like all the others. Same bone structure, same mannerisms, same speech patterns. They moved in similar ways, tilted their heads at the same angle when listening, used identical gestures when talking. The 6th house was where I found children who looked like smaller versions of the adults. Not just family resemblance, actual copies like someone had shrunk down the grown-ups. A little girl who was a perfect miniature of her mother. A boy who looked exactly like his father at age 8. At the 7th house, I finally understood what was happening. The woman who answered the door was me. Not similar to me, not resembling me. She was me, but female. Same face, same bone structure, same expressions. She even had the same scar on her left eyebrow from when I fell off my bike at age 10. "Mail for the Henderson family," she said in my own voice, pitched higher. I looked down at the mail in my hands. It was addressed to Carl Hend, person at this address. My own name in my own handwriting. I'm Carl Henderson," I stammered. "We're all Carl Henderson here," she said pleasantly. "We've always been Carl Henderson." Behind her, I could see a man who was also me and 3 children who were smaller versions of me. All of them staring with my own eyes, smiling with my own mouth. I dropped the mail and ran back to my truck. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. In the rearview mirror, I watched the Henderson family wave goodbye with my own hand gestures. The route sheet on my dashboard now showed 8 houses instead of 7. The 8th address was listed as my current location, with Carl Henderson, postal worker, 1 resident, written in my own handwriting. I'd never written that. My reflection in the side mirror was getting blurrier. The edges of my face were starting to fade. like someone was erasing them. I could feel my memories getting fuzzy too. What was my wife's name again? Did I have kids? Where did I live before starting this route? I knew I had to get out of there, but the road seemed longer than before. The trees pressed closer to the gravel, branches scraping the sides of my truck. My gas gauge was dropping fast, even though I'd filled up that morning. The engine was making noises I'd never heard before. Mile after mile through the dark forest, and nothing looked familiar anymore. I couldn't remember which way I'd come in. The road kept branching off in directions that hadn't been there before. Every path looked the same, narrow gravel disappearing into thick trees. My radio was picking up strange signals, conversations in my own voice, multiple versions of me discussing mail routes and weather and family dinners I'd never had. Sometimes I could hear Jerry's voice too, talking about how much he loved living in Deadwood Hollow, how he'd never want to leave. That's when I saw Jerry's truck parked in front of one of the houses. Same postal service vehicle, same license plate, but covered in years of rust and dirt. Like it had been sitting there for decades. Jerry himself was on the front porch, but he looked just like all the other residents now. Same bone structure, same mannerisms. He waved at me with that familiar gesture they all used. "Hey, Carl," he called out. "Good to see you. How do you like the route?" "Jerry, what happened to you? How long have you been here?" His face went confused. "Been here? Carl, I've lived in Deadwood Hollow my whole life. We all have. We've always been here." "No, Jerry. You're a mail carrier. You worked the same office as me for 20 years. He laughed, the same pleasant laugh as all the others. "Mail carrier? That's crazy talk, Carl. I'm part of the Henderson family, just like you're going to be." In his yard, I could see more postal trucks. Different years and models, all rusted and forgotten. How many carriers had gotten lost on this route? How many had been absorbed into the hollow, turned into residents who believed they'd always lived there? I floored the gas pedal and got out of there as fast as my truck would go. But even as I drove away, I could feel parts of my identity slipping away. My apartment back in town felt like a dream. My coworkers' faces were fading from memory. Even my own name was starting to sound foreign. It took me 3 hours to find my way out of that forest. The road kept changing, leading me in circles, trying to bring me back to those houses. My truck was running on fumes by the time I finally saw the interstate. I drove straight to the post office and told my supervisor I was never going back to that route. He looked at me like I was crazy. "What route?" "Carl, you've been off sick for 3 weeks. Jerry's been covering your regular downtown route." According to the schedule, I'd never been assigned to Deadwood Hollow. There was no record of Jerry calling in sick, no record of any special route assignments. But I know what I experienced. And said, "The worst part is the mail. Every few weeks I get letters addressed to me at a house number on County Road 47. The return address is my own name, but in handwriting I don't recognize. The letters are invitations, asking me to come home, to join the family, to stop fighting what I know is meant to be. Sometimes I catch myself driving toward those woods without remembering how I got in my car. I'll be halfway there before I realize what I'm doing and turn around. Jerry's still working at the post office. He acts normal, does his job, goes home to his wife every night. But sometimes I catch him staring at me with that same pleasant expression, and I wonder if the Jerry who came back is really Jerry at all. Last week, I found a new letter in my mailbox. Same handwriting as the others, but this time, the message was different. "Dear Carl, the route misses you. The families ask about you every day. Jerry says to tell you that your house is waiting, your mailbox is installed, and your name is already on the deed. You've always belonged in Deadwood Hollow. You've always been part of the family. Come home soon. The Henderson family." I burned that letter, just like all the others. But I kept the envelope. And sometimes, late at night, I find myself studying the return address, wondering what it would be like to just drive back there and stop fighting it, to let myself fade into that pleasant, simple life where everyone knows their place and no one ever has to leave. The scary thing is, part of me wants to... My name is Rick Martinez, and I've been working for Dominion Energy in Virginia for 9 years. Started right out of high school as an apprentice lineman, worked my way up to senior power line technician. I've climbed poles in ice storms, fixed lines during hurricanes, and worked through 3 major blackouts that left half the state without power. My supervisor always said I was the guy they could count on when things got bad. I thought I'd seen everything the job could throw at me. But what happened last February in Demon's Hollow changed everything I thought I knew about electricity, about the power grid, and about what's really out there in the deep woods of Virginia. The worst ice storm in 20 years hit the Blue Ridge Mountains that winter. 3 days of freezing rain followed by sub-zero temperatures. It coated everything in a shell of ice so thick it snapped century-old oak trees like twigs. Power lines went down all across the mountains, leaving thousands of people without heat or electricity in the middle of winter. I was part of the emergency repair crew working 18-hour days to get the grid back online. Most of the damage was near roads where our trucks could reach, but there were reports of major line failures deep in the mountains where no vehicle could go. That's where I came in. I was one of the few guys crazy enough to hike into the wilderness with 60 pounds of equipment strapped to my back. My assignment was to assess damage along the main transmission line that ran through Demon's Hollow, 15 miles of thick forest from the nearest logging road. The 138 kilovolt line carried power to 3 rural communities, and it had been dark for 4 days. People were starting to evacuate, but my supervisor wanted to know if we could get it fixed before we lost those customers for good. I packed my gear the night before: voltage detector, infrared, thermometer, digital multimeter, emergency radio, GPS unit, climbing gear, and enough food and water for 2 days. The forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the 20s, cold but manageable. I figured I'd hike in, find the break, radio back with a repair estimate, and hike out. Standard procedure. I started the hike at dawn, following an old hunting trail that paralleled the transmission line. The ice storm had turned the forest into a crystal cathedral. Every branch, every leaf, every blade of grass was coated in clear ice that caught the morning sunlight like prisms. It was beautiful, but also deadly quiet. The storm had killed most of the wildlife, birds frozen in their nests, deer collapsed under the weight of ice-covered trees. The trail wound deeper into the mountains, through forest that hadn't been touched by logging in over 50 years. These were old-growth trees, some of them probably here when the power line was first built back in the 1960s. The canopy was so thick it formed tunnels over the trail, and with the ice coating it felt like walking through a frozen cave. My equipment worked fine for the first hour. GPS showed me exactly where I was, radio had clear contact with dispatch, and my voltage detector confirmed the line was completely dead. No residual charge, safe to work on once I found the damage. But as I got deeper into Demon's Hollow, things started acting up. First, my GPS signal got weaker, then started jumping around. The unit showed me in 3 different locations within 10 minutes, none of them matching the trail I was actually on. Then my radio started picking up interference, a low buzzing sound that got stronger the further I hiked. By the time I was 5 miles in, both devices were basically useless. I figured it was the terrain. Deep valleys and thick forest can mess with signals. I had a backup compass and paper, maps, so I wasn't worried about getting lost. The power line itself was like a highway through the forest. I could follow it even without electronic navigation. But that's when I noticed the first really strange thing. The trees weren't just coated with ice from the storm. They were growing in patterns that didn't make sense. Perfect rows, like someone had planted them in geometric designs. Spirals of oak trees surrounding clusters of pine, with spaces between them that formed exact circles and triangles when seen from above. I stopped and pulled out my camera to document it. Through the viewfinder, the pattern was even more obvious. These trees had been arranged deliberately, but that was impossible. This forest had been wild for centuries. No logging company would plant trees in decorative patterns, especially not mixed species like this. The ice formations were weird too. Instead of just coating the branches naturally, the ice hung in spirals and loops that seemed to defy gravity. Some icicles curved upward, others formed perfect geometric shapes, hexagons, pyramids, elaborate knots that couldn't have formed naturally. When I breathed, my breath didn't just fog up normal. The air tasted metallic, like licking a battery, and it made my teeth ache. I checked my voltage detector, thinking maybe there was still power in the lines causing some kind of electromagnetic effect. But the detector showed 0 volts, same as before. Whatever was causing the weird ice formations, it wasn't electricity from the grid. After another mile of hiking, I found the real problem. The power lines weren't just down. They had been arranged. Someone or something had pulled the heavy cables down from their towers and woven them between the trees in complex patterns like a giant spider web made of high-voltage wire. The metal was still alive somehow, even though my detector had shown no power in the main line. Sparks jumped between the cables and the metal towers, creating a crackling web of electricity that stretched across a clearing the size of a football field. In the center of this electric web was a circle where all the trees had died overnight. Not gradually, not from disease, just dead, like someone had flipped a switch. The dead trees were covered in a black substance that looked like tar but moved like it was alive. It pulsed and flowed over the bark in slow waves, and wherever it touched, the wood underneath turned soft and spongy. When I got closer, I could see it wasn't just on the trees. It was spreading across the ground, the rocks, even the ice itself. I keyed my radio to call this in to dispatch, but instead of static or the normal emergency frequency, I heard something else. A sound like Morse code, but faster and more complex. Dots and dashes and longer tones that formed patterns I almost recognized, like they were trying to be language. My hands started shaking, and not from the cold. I'd been working power lines for 9 years, and I'd never seen anything like this. Electricity doesn't behave this way. It follows laws of physics, flows from high voltage to low voltage, takes the path of least resistance. But the energy in those cables was moving in circles, forming patterns, almost like it was conscious. I tried to back away from the clearing, but my equipment started malfunctioning in ways that shouldn't have been possible. My metal tools, the voltage detector, multimeter, even my hammer and screwdrivers, started turning soft like rubber. The hard plastic cases on my electronic gear began changing color, shifting from black and yellow to deep purple and green, colors that hurt to look at directly, like they existed outside the normal spectrum. When I touched one of the infected ice formations with my gloved hand, my fingers went numb immediately. Not cold numb, dead numb, like the nerves had been severed. Through the insulated glove, I could see my fingertips turning black, the same color as the substance covering the dead trees. The blackness spread up my fingers toward my palm, and I could feel it moving under my skin like liquid metal. It didn't hurt exactly, but I knew it was changing me at the cellular level. My hand felt different, stronger in some ways, more sensitive to electrical fields, but also less human. I yanked off the glove and saw that my fingernails had started growing, but they weren't just getting longer. Thin strands of copper wire were growing underneath them, poking through the nail beds like metal splinters. When I flexed my fingers, tiny sparks jumped between the wires. That's when I realized what I was looking at. The black substance wasn't just some kind of fungus or chemical contamination. It was a technological infection, something that rewrote living tissue to conduct electricity. The power lines hadn't been arranged randomly. They were being used as a transmission system for this spreading corruption. I started running back toward the trail, but the contamination zone was expanding faster than I could move. Every tree the black substance touched became part of some larger electrical network. Branches that had been dead wood moments before started glowing with their own internal light, pulsing in rhythm like a heartbeat. Behind me, I heard voices calling my name, but they weren't human voices. They buzzed and clicked like old dial-up modems, electronic sounds that formed words. Rick. Join us, Rick. The grid needs you, Rick. I looked back and saw other utility workers emerging from the infected forest. At least, they had been utility workers once. Now their bodies were partly merged with electrical equipment. Hard hats had grown into their skulls. Safety harnesses had become part of their rib cages, and copper wire ran through their veins like a secondary circulatory system. One of them was Dave Kowalski, a lineman who'd gone missing 3 weeks ago during the initial storm assessment. Half his face was still human, but the other half was a mess of circuit boards and LED lights. When he spoke, his voice came through a speaker, built into his chest. "The infection uses the power grid to spread," he said, words distorted by electronic static. "Every house, every business, every device connected to the electrical system becomes part of the network. You can't stop it, Rick. You can only join it." More infected workers emerged from the trees. Jim Patterson from the Richmond office, Sarah Chen, who'd trained me when I was an apprentice, even old Bill Murphy, who'd retired last year. All of them partially transformed, all of them connected to the spreading technological plague. I realized this wasn't just about Demon's Hollow anymore. If this infection could travel through power lines, it could spread across the entire electrical grid. Every repair crew we sent to fix the damage would become part of the infection. Every home and business we reconnected would become a new transmission point. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, my infected hand growing more numb and more metallic with each step. Behind me, the electronic voices of my former coworkers grew louder, and I could hear the crackling of high-voltage electricity spreading through the forest canopy. My truck was still at the trailhead, but when I reached it, I saw that the battery cables had turned black. The same corruption that was spreading through the forest had already reached my vehicle through some connection I couldn't understand. When I tried to start the engine, the radio started broadcasting the same electronic language I'd heard in the forest. I abandoned the truck and hiked 5 miles to the nearest road where a state trooper picked me up. I was hypothermic and exhausted, babbling about electrical infections and transformed utility workers. They took me to the hospital where doctors said I was suffering from severe frostbite and possible electrical injury to my nervous system. But I knew what was really happening, the black substance under my fingernails kept growing, spreading slowly up my hand despite every treatment they tried. The copper wires were getting longer, more complex, forming patterns that looked like circuit diagrams etched into my skin. I tried to warn my supervisor about what I'd found in Demon's Hollow, but he thought I was having a breakdown from hypothermia and exposure. The company sent other crews to assess the damage, but none of them came back. The power outages spread to 3 more counties, and every repair attempt just made it worse. Now it's been 6 months, and the contamination zone covers half of central Virginia. The news reports blame it on ice storm damage and infrastructure failures, but I know the truth. Every power line that goes dark, every repair crew that disappears, every electrical device that starts malfunctioning, it's all part of the same spreading infection. The changes to my body are getting worse. The copper wires under my nails have grown into a complex network that runs up both arms now. Sometimes I can feel the electrical current flowing through them, connecting me to power lines miles away. I can hear the electronic voices of other infected workers calling to me through the grid, telling me it's time to come home. I know I don't have much time left as a fully human being. Soon the infection will reach my brain, and I'll become another voice in that electronic chorus, another node in the spreading network. But for now, I'm still human enough to warn people. If you're a utility worker, if you work on power lines or electrical systems anywhere in Virginia, don't go alone into areas where the grid has failed. Don't trust repair orders for remote locations, especially in the mountains. And if your equipment starts behaving strangely, if metal tools turn soft or electronics change color, run. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to understand it. Just run. The infection is still spreading, using the power grid itself as a transmission system. Every connected device is a potential entry point, every power line a pathway for the corruption. And somewhere deep in Demon's Hollow, in that clearing full of dead trees and impossible electricity, the source of it all is still growing stronger. My name is Rick Martinez, and I used to be a power line technician. In a few more days, I'll be something else entirely. But until then, I'm going to keep trying to warn people about what's coming through the wires. My name is Danny Morrison, and I've been running a tow truck service in eastern Kentucky for 8 years now. I cover 3 counties, some of the most remote areas you can imagine. I've pulled cars out of ditches and blizzards, hauled wrecks from mountain curves in the middle of the night, and rescued folks from places where cell phones don't work and GPS gives up. I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened last October in Blackwood Forest changed everything I thought I knew about helping people in trouble. I started this business right after high school. My dad taught me everything about engines, and I got my commercial driver's license when I turned 21. The work isn't easy. Long hours, dangerous roads, and people who are usually having the worst day of their lives. But I like helping folks, and the money's decent if you don't mind working nights and weekends. I've got a 2018 Ford F550 with a Century Wrecker bed, LED light bar, and winch rated for 12,000 pounds. She's not pretty, but she gets the job done. Most calls come through the county dispatch or directly to my cell. I work alone, can't afford help yet, but I know these roads better than anyone. I've been driving them since I was 16, hunting with my grandfather. The mountains here are old and deep, with logging roads that snake through forests most people never see. The call came in at 11:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I was filling out paperwork from an earlier job. Insurance company wants everything documented these days. My phone rang and the number showed up as blocked. Morrison Towing, this is Danny. Oh, thank God. Someone answered. The voice was a woman, crying. My name is Maria Santos. We're stranded on a back road in Blackwood Forest. Our car broke down hours ago. I grabbed a pen and started writing. Okay, ma'am, slow down. Where exactly are you? I don't know the road name. We were trying to take a shortcut to my sister's house in Pikeville. The GPS took us down this logging road and now the engine won't start. I have 2 kids with me. They're scared and cold. The desperation in her voice got to me. I've got a soft spot for families in trouble, especially with kids involved. Do you have GPS coordinates? That'll help me find you faster. She gave me the numbers, and I plugged them into my truck's navigation system. The location showed deep in Blackwood Forest, about 40 minutes from town on roads I hadn't been on in years. The logging companies stopped working that area back in 2019 after some accidents, so there wasn't much reason to go up there. All right, Mrs. Santos, I'm loading up now. Stay with your vehicle, keep the doors locked, and save your phone battery. I'll be there as soon as I can. Please hurry, she said. Something doesn't feel right out here. We keep hearing noises in the trees. The line went dead. I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. I loaded my truck with extra gear, jumper cables, spare alternator belts, emergency flares, and a powerful spotlight. The night was clear but cold, with no moon. My headlights cut through the darkness as I headed toward Blackwood Forest, following the winding county road that would take me to the logging area. The first 20 miles were familiar territory. I'd made runs out this way before, mostly pulling hunters' trucks out of mud holes or dealing with overheated engines on the steep grades. But as I got deeper into the forest, the roads got narrower and rougher. Tree branches scraped against my truck's roof, and the pavement gave way to gravel, then just packed dirt. My radio started crackling with static around mile 15. The county dispatch signal always got weak in the mountains, but this was worse than usual. By mile 20, I couldn't reach anyone. My cell phone showed 1 bar, then no service at all. The GPS coordinates led me onto a logging road I barely remembered. The entrance was almost hidden by overgrown brush, and my truck's big frame barely fit between the trees. This road was built for loaded logging trucks 20 years ago, but nature was taking it back fast. The forest felt different up here, older. The trees were massive, oaks and maples that had been growing for centuries before the logging company touched the area. My headlights seemed dimmer somehow, like the darkness was thicker. I kept checking my mirrors, feeling like something was following me, but saw nothing except trees. After 45 minutes of careful driving, I still hadn't found the Santos family. The road kept going deeper into the forest, winding around hills and crossing small creeks. My truck's engine was running hot from the constant low-gear climbing, and I was starting to worry about getting stuck myself. Then my headlights caught something ahead, the outline of a car sitting sideways across the road. I pulled up about 50 feet away and grabbed my spotlight. The car was a blue Honda Civic, newer model with Ohio plates. All 4 doors were standing wide open, and the dome light was still on, slowly draining the battery. I could see luggage scattered around the vehicle. Clothes, toys, and what looked like snacks and drinks spread across the dirt road. "Hello?" I called out, keeping my truck running and the headlights aimed at the scene. "Mrs. Santos, this is Danny from the tow service." My voice echoed back from the trees, but nobody answered. I grabbed my flashlight and walked closer to examine the Honda. The front seats had blood on them, not much, but fresh. The keys were still in the ignition, and when I tried starting it, the engine turned over fine. Nothing wrong with the car that I could see. So why were they stranded? That's when I noticed the footprints in the soft dirt around the vehicle. Maria's shoes, small women's sneakers, 2 sets of kids' prints, different sizes. They led away from the car and into the tree line, heading deeper into the forest. But there were other prints too. Bare feet, much larger than Maria's, with long toes and what looked like claw marks. At least 4 different sets, maybe more. They followed the family's trail into the woods. I should have called for backup then, but my radio was dead and my phone had no signal. I should have driven back to town and gotten the sheriff. But I kept thinking about those 2 scared kids lost in the dark forest. Professional pride, maybe, or just stubbornness. I'd never left a customer stranded before. I followed the trail with my flashlight, staying close enough to my truck to see the headlights. The family's path was easy to track. They'd been breaking branches and leaving pieces of clothing as they went. A child's jacket hung from a thorn bush. A woman's blouse was caught on a low branch, torn almost in half. The bare footprints were everywhere now, surrounding the family's trail like wolves circling prey. Whatever made these prints was smart. They'd been herding Maria and her kids deeper into the forest, cutting off escape routes and forcing them towards some destination. I heard voices then, faint but clear. Maria calling for help, children crying. But something was wrong with the sounds. They echoed strangely, like they were coming from underground or far away. And there were other voices too, making sounds that weren't quite human. The trail led to a clearing about a 1/4 mile from the road. I could see flickering light through the trees, a fire maybe. I turned off my flashlight and crept forward, using tree trunks for cover. What I saw in that clearing still gives me nightmares. 3 crude shelters made from branches and animal skins formed a triangle around a fire pit. The fire was burning bones. Some looked like deer or bear, but others were too small, too familiar. Human bones, children's bones. Maria Santos and her 2 kids were tied to trees on the far side of the clearing. They were alive, but hurt. Maria's leg was bent wrong, probably broken. Her daughter, maybe 8 years old, was missing 2 fingers on her left hand. The wounds were fresh, wrapped in dirty cloth. The boy, younger, maybe 5, had cuts all over his arms and face. But the worst part was the things moving around the fire. At first glance, they looked like people, 3 adults and 2 children wearing scraps of old clothing. But when they stepped into the firelight, I could see what they really were. Their skin was pale and stretched tight, like it didn't fit right. Their hair was long and matted with dirt and blood. Their teeth had been filed to sharp points, and their fingernails had grown into claws. They moved wrong, too, more like animals than people, hunched over and sniffing the air. When they talked, it was clicks and grunts and sounds that hurt to hear. They'd been human once, maybe years ago. Now they were something else. The smallest one, a child who couldn't have been more than 10, was gnawing on what looked like a human arm. Fresh blood ran down its chin. These were the missing campers and hikers. The search and rescue teams had been looking for them for years, families who went into the forest and never came back. They'd survived by eating anyone unlucky enough to get lost in their territory, and now they had Maria's family. As I watched, one of the adults walked over to Maria and said something in that clicking language. Maria shook her head and screamed. The thing grabbed her son's arm and showed her a rusty knife. They were deciding which piece to take next. I had 2 choices: drive back to town and get help, knowing Maria's family would be dead before I returned, or try to save them myself with nothing but a tire iron and whatever courage I could find. I chose courage. I crept back to my truck and grabbed everything useful: tire iron, emergency flares, jumper cables, and a can of starting fluid. The starting fluid was highly flammable. My plan was simple and probably stupid, but it was all I had. I lit 3 road flares and threw them into the clearing from different directions, trying to confuse the cannibals and give myself some light to work with. Then I charged in with the tire iron, yelling as loud as I could. The cannibals scattered like roaches when the light hit them, but they didn't run far. They circled around me, staying just outside the flare light, making those horrible clicking sounds to coordinate their attack. I got to Maria first and started cutting her ropes with my pocket knife. "Stay calm," I told her. "I'm getting you out of here." "They killed my husband," she whispered. "They made us watch. They're going to eat my babies." The largest cannibal, a man who might have been a hiker once, stepped into the light. His face was painted with blood, and he carried a spear made from a broken tree branch. He pointed at me and clicked something to the others. They attacked all at once. I swung the tire iron as hard as I could, catching the first one in the ribs. Bone cracked, but it kept coming. These things didn't feel pain like normal people. The female jumped on my back, clawing at my face and neck. I spun around and slammed her into a tree, but her claws left deep cuts across my scalp. The children were the worst. They moved fast and low, trying to hamstring me like wolves taking down a deer. I had to kick one away from Maria's daughter, and the sound it made when my boot connected still haunts me. But I was bigger and stronger, and I had better weapons. The tire iron broke the male's arm with a wet snap. The starting fluid, sprayed into the fire, sent flames shooting across the clearing and caught one of the females on fire. She ran screaming into the woods. I got Maria and her kids free, but her broken leg meant she couldn't run. I had to carry the youngest boy, while Maria's daughter helped support her mother. We stumbled through the dark forest toward my truck, the cannibals howling behind us. When we reached the truck, I discovered they'd been busy while I was in the clearing. The engine compartment was open and wires were pulled loose. The fuel line had been cut. They'd tried to strand us just like they'd stranded everyone else. But I know engines, and I always carry spare parts. While Maria and her kids huddled in the cab, I worked by flashlight to reconnect the fuel line and splice the damaged wires. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the tools, but I got it done. The engine turned over on the 3rd try. We drove out of that forest with the cannibals chasing us. I could see them in my mirrors, running alongside the truck through the trees, keeping pace even at 20 miles per hour. They followed us for miles, howling and clicking that terrible language. When we finally reached the main road and my phone got signal, I called 911. The sheriff's department and state police went back to the clearing the next day, but they found nothing except cold ashes and old bones. The cannibals had vanished deeper into the forest, probably to find a new hunting ground. Maria and her kids survived, but they're not okay. The boy won't speak. The girl wakes up screaming every night. Maria's in therapy, trying to deal with watching her husband die. They moved to Florida to live with relatives as far from Kentucky mountains as they could get. I still run my tow truck service, but I won't take calls into Blackwood Forest anymore. I tell people my truck can't handle those roads, or I'm too busy, or the insurance won't cover it. Let someone else be the hero, because I know the truth now. Those things are still out there, waiting for the next family to take a wrong turn. And there's nothing a tire iron and road flares can do against something that used to be human, but chose to become a monster. Some rescues just aren't worth the risk. My name is Linda Matthews, and I've been driving school buses in eastern Kentucky for 16 years. I got my CDL when I was 26, right after my divorce, because I needed steady work with benefits. The pay isn't great, but I love working with kids, and the schedule lets me be home when my own daughter gets out of school. I've driven through ice storms, flash floods, and fog so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead. I've handled everything from kids fighting in the back to medical emergencies. But what happened last October changed everything I thought I knew about these mountain roads. It was a Friday afternoon in late October. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the mountains in bright reds and yellows. I was driving Route 47, my usual run that takes me through 3 small towns, picking up kids from Thornfield Elementary and Middle School. I'd been doing this same route for 8 years, knew every pothole and curve by heart. The bus was a 2018 Bluebird, 77-passenger, equipped with GPS tracking and a two-way radio system that connected me to the transportation office. Standard safety equipment included emergency exits, first aid kit, fire extinguisher, and reflective triangles. The company requires monthly safety inspections and quarterly driver evaluations. I had a clean record, never missed a day, and the kids respected me because I was firm but fair. That afternoon, I had 12 kids on board, ages 6 to 14. Little Susie Henderson always sat in the front seat because she got car sick. The Johnson twins, both in 4th grade, usually argued over who got the window seat. Tommy Martinez was 8 and always brought his Pokemon cards to trade with the other kids. Marcus Williams, 14, sat in the back with the older kids and helped me keep an eye on the younger ones. They were all excited because it was Friday and Halloween was coming up next week. We left the school at 3:15 p.m., right on schedule. The October sun was already getting low behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the road. About 10 minutes into the drive, just as we were approaching the turn onto Highway 421, I saw orange construction signs ahead. A county worker flagged me down. "Road's closed, ma'am," he said through my open window. "Had a rock slide about 2 miles up. Big boulders came down during that storm we had Wednesday night. Won't be cleared until Monday at the earliest." I checked my GPS unit mounted on the dashboard. The detour route it showed would take us 40 minutes out of the way on main roads. But there was another option: the old logging trail through Thornfield Hollow. It was barely wide enough for a car, let alone a school bus, but it would cut the detour time in half. "Can I take the logging road through the hollow?" I asked. He scratched his head. "Well, it's county property, so it's legal. But I wouldn't recommend it, especially not with a school bus. That trail hasn't been maintained in years." I looked at my watch. If I took the long detour, some of these kids wouldn't get home until after 5 o'clock. Their parents would be worried, and I'd catch heat from my supervisor for not following the most efficient route. The logging trail was rough, but I'd driven it before in my personal truck during hunting season. "I'll take it slow," I told him. "These kids need to get home." I got back on the radio to inform dispatch about the route change. "Unit 47 to base, over." Static crackled through the speaker. "Go ahead, Unit 47. Taking the Thornfield Hollow logging trail due to rock slide on 421. Should add about 30 minutes to my run, over." "Copy that, Linda. Be careful on that old road. Radio check in when you're through." I turned left onto the narrow gravel road that led into Thornfield Hose. Low. The kids started asking questions right away. "Why are we going this way, Miss Linda?" Susie asked from the front seat. "Just a little detour, honey. There's some rocks blocking our regular road." The logging trail was worse than I remembered. Tree branches scraped against both sides of the bus, making scratching sounds like fingernails on a chalkboard. The gravel was loose and rutted, forcing me to drive barely 15 miles per hour. Dense woods closed in around us, towering oaks and maples whose canopy blocked out most of the afternoon sun. Even though it was only 3:30, it felt like evening inside those woods. "It's really dark in here," Tommy said, pressing his face against the window. "Like a tunnel," one of the Johnson twins added. The deeper we went into the hollow, the darker it got. My headlights automatically kicked on, cutting through the gloom between the trees. The radio started crackling with static, making it hard to hear anything clearly. I tried raising dispatch again. "Unit 47 to base, radio check, over." Nothing but static answered back. I adjusted the squelch and tried again. Still nothing. Cell phone coverage had always been spotty in these mountains, but I usually had radio contact. The GPS unit was still working, showing our position creeping slowly along the thin gray line that represented the logging trail. That's when I saw the first one. About 10 minutes into the trail, something moved between the trees on my left. At first I thought it was a deer, but the motion was wrong. Too fast, too fluid. When I looked closer, squinting through the windshield, I realized it looked like a person running through the woods, but the way it moved made my stomach clench. It was jumping from tree to tree, covering ground impossibly fast, its arms and legs seeming too long for its body. Miss Linda, Susie pointed out the window. Why is that man not wearing any clothes? I looked where she was pointing and felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. The figure was naked, pale white against the dark trees, but its proportions were all wrong. Its arms hung down past its knees, and its legs were stretched out like someone had pulled them through a taffy machine. The worst part was that it was keeping pace with the bus, running alongside us through the forest. It's just shadows, honey, I told Susie, but my voice came out shaky. Sometimes the light plays tricks on you in the woods. But I knew what I was seeing, and it wasn't alone. More of them started appearing on both sides of the trail. The kids pressed their faces against the windows, pointing and asking questions I couldn't answer. These things looked like they used to be people, but something had changed them. Their skin was bone white, stretched tight over elongated limbs. They moved like animals, bounding through the underbrush on all fours, before standing up to run on two legs that were far too long. "There's more of them," Marcus called from the back of the bus. "They're everywhere." The pale figures were coming closer now, running right up to the edge of the trail. I could see their faces clearly through the windows, and that's when the real horror hit me. They had human features, eyes, noses, mouths, but everything was stretched and distorted. Their mouths were too wide, filled with teeth that looked filed to sharp points. When they pressed their hands against the bus windows, I could see their fingers were wrong too. Too long, with too many joints, like spider legs. 8-year-old Tommy started crying. "They look like my Uncle Dave," he sobbed. "Uncle Dave went missing last year hunting in these woods." The handprints they left on the windows were smeared and strange. I tried to speed up, but the trail was too rough and narrow. The bus bounced and lurched over rocks and roots, making the kids scream as they were thrown around in their seats. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Scattered through the woods, hanging from branches and caught on thorns, were pieces of clothing, a flannel shirt, a woman's purse, a hunting jacket, a wedding ring glinting on a skeletal finger that was wrapped around a tree branch. These weren't monsters. These were people, hikers, hunters, maybe other drivers who'd taken this route and never made it out. Something in these woods was changing them, stretching them into these horrible creatures, and they weren't trying to hurt us. They were trying to warn us. The creatures pressed against the windows, their mouths moving like they were trying to speak. Their eyes were wide with terror and desperation. One of them, a woman with long hair and a stretched face, kept pointing deeper into the woods and shaking her head. She was trying to tell us to turn back, but it was too late. I looked down at my hands, gripping the steering wheel, and felt my heart stop. My fingers looked longer than they should be, my skin paler than normal. The wedding ring I'd worn for 20 years was sliding loose on my finger. "Miss Linda?" Susie's voice was small and scared. "My arms feel funny." I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the kids looking at each other with growing horror. Little Tommy's neck was getting longer, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. Marcus's arms were hanging down below his knees now. The Johnson twins were giggling, but the sound was wrong, too high-pitched and musical. Whatever was in these woods, just being here was enough to start changing us. I could feel my bones creaking and stretching, my spine extending vertebra by vertebra. My vision was getting sharper, but colors were fading to gray and white. The world looked different through these new eyes. I floored the gas pedal, desperate to get us out before the transformation went too far. The bus lurched and bounced over the rough trail, branches slapping against the windshield. But with every mile we traveled deeper into the hollow, the changes got worse. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed my face elongating, my jaw unhinging like a snake's. The kids weren't screaming, "Gee," anymore. They were accepting their changes, adapting to their new bodies with the flexibility that only children have. Some of them were even laughing as their limbs grew longer. The pale creatures in the woods weren't chasing us anymore. They were reaching for us, trying to pull us deeper into the forest. They wanted us to join them, to become part of their community of the changed. And part of me, the part that was no longer entirely human, wanted to go. But I still remembered being Linda Matthews, bus driver, mother, human being. I still had enough of myself left to fight. Using every ounce of willpower I had, I kept my foot on the gas and my hands on the wheel. My elongated fingers wrapped around the steering wheel like spider legs, but I held on. The children behind me were changing faster now, their bones cracking and reforming, but they were still my responsibility. The GPS showed we were 3/4 of the way through the hollow. If I could just hold on to my humanity for another 10 minutes, maybe we could make it to the other side. Maybe the changes would stop. Maybe we could still be saved. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. The transformation was too far along. My spine had stretched so much that my head almost touched the roof of the bus. The children were giggling and clicking their teeth together, making sounds no human child should make. We were becoming something new, something that belonged in these deep woods. The last thing I remember as Linda Matthews was seeing the end of the trail ahead, sunlight streaming through normal-looking trees. We were almost out. Almost back to the regular world where people were the right shape and size. But by then, it was too late for almost. I don't drive school buses anymore. The company says I never came back from that run, that bus 47 was found empty at the bottom of Thornfield Hollow with no sign of me or the 12 children. The official report blamed mechanical failure and driver error, but I know the truth. We're still here, in the deep woods where the old logging trails wind, through places that aren't quite part of the normal world. The children and I have learned to live with our new bodies, our new ways of moving through the forest. We've made friends with the others who came before us. And sometimes, when another vehicle takes that shortcut through Thornfield Hollow, we try to warn them. We press our changed faces against their windows and point back toward the regular world. We try to tell them to turn around, to take the long way home, but they never listen. They never understand what we're trying to say. And then they become like us, and the community in the deep woods grows a little bit larger. If you ever find yourself on a back road in eastern Kentucky and you see a detour sign pointing toward Thornfield Hollow, take my advice. Take the long way around. Some shortcuts aren't worth the time you save, because once you start changing, there's no going back to who you used to be. My name is Jessica Martinez, and I've been delivering food for 6 years now. I work for multiple apps: DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, whatever pays the bills in eastern Tennessee. I've delivered to crack houses, drunk college kids, and people who answer the door half naked. I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened last month in the Serpent Ridge area changed everything I thought I knew about my job. I started this work right out of high school when I couldn't afford college. My beat-up Honda Civic has over 200,000 miles on it, but it still runs. I know every back road, every apartment complex, every sketchy neighborhood from Knoxville to the Kentucky border. I've had customers try to pay with weed, had dogs chase me, even had a guy answer the door with a gun. But I never quit a delivery. Never. The money's decent if you work long hours, and I need every dollar. The order came in on a Tuesday afternoon around 1 p.m. It was weird from the start. Instead of a regular address, it just showed GPS coordinates, 36.2847 degree N, 84 to 1203 degree W. The customer name was listed as The Family. That should have been my first red flag, but the order was huge. 15 steaks, 10 whole chickens, 5 pounds of ground beef. And here's the really strange part: 3 live rabbits and 2 live chickens from a specialty farm supply store. The total was over $800, and they'd already paid in cash through some kind of special arrangement with the restaurants. Plus, they left a $200 tip. $200. That was more than I usually made in 2 days. The delivery instructions just said, follow the trail markers to the clearing. I picked up all the food first. The restaurant staff looked confused about the live animals, but apparently the customer had called ahead and arranged everything. The rabbits were in small wooden crates, and the chickens were in a wire carrier. They were making no bomb. I was in my back seat, and I felt bad for them, but a job's a job. I punched the coordinates into my GPS, and it led me to a dirt road about 12 miles outside Serpent Ridge. I'd never been out there before. The road started normal enough, gravel with a few potholes, but it kept getting narrower as I drove deeper into the forest. After about 2 miles, it was barely wide enough for my car. The trees started closing in overhead, forming a thick canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. It was only 2 p.m., but it felt like evening under there. My GPS kept saying, "Continue straight," but I couldn't see any trail markers yet. The animals in my back seat were getting quieter, which was somehow worse than when they were making noise. That's when my car radio died. Not static, not losing signal. It just went completely silent. I tried changing stations, but nothing worked. Then I checked my phone. No signal, no GPS. The screen just showed "searching," where the bars should be. I was starting to get nervous, but I'd come this far, and that $200 tip was too good to pass up. I kept driving until I saw the first trail marker, a pile of stones stacked up on the side of the road with what looked like a deer skull balanced on top. It was pointing toward an even narrower path that curved off into the woods. The path was barely wide enough for my car, and branches scraped against my windows as I drove. Every few hundred feet there was another stone pile with a skull, deer, maybe some raccoons, and a few I couldn't identify. Between the stone markers, red cloth strips were tied to tree branches, showing me where to go when the path split. Then I started seeing the handprints. They were pressed into the mud along the trail, but they weren't right. They looked human at first glance, but they were huge, maybe twice the size of my hand, and the fingers were too long. There were too many joints, like each finger could bend in 3 places instead of 2. Some of the prints were fresh, still damp in the mud. I told myself they had to be fake, maybe part of some Halloween decoration or something. But my hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The trees around me had symbols carved into them, spirals, stick figures, triangles that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The air coming through my vents smelled like metal and rotting meat, making my nose burn and my eyes water. It was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat, except for these weird scraping sounds that seemed to come from underground. After about 20 minutes of driving through this nightmare forest, I reached a clearing. My car bumped over some roots and came to a stop in front of the strangest sight I'd ever seen. There were caves carved into a hillside. Not natural caves, but perfectly round tunnels that went back into the rock. Too perfect to be natural. Around the clearing, more stone piles formed a perfect circle, each stack balanced exactly the same height. Bone wind chimes hung from the tree branches all around the clearing, clicking and rattling, even though there wasn't any breeze. The smell hit me as soon as I turned off my engine. It was like a mix of strong chemicals and rotting garbage, so overwhelming I had to cover my nose with my shirt. I sat in my car for a minute, trying to figure out what to do. The food was getting cold, the animals were barely moving, and I was starting to think that $200 wasn't worth whatever this was. That's when I saw the first one. A figure emerged from the largest cave opening, tall, maybe 7 feet, and pale white like it had never seen sunlight. Its limbs were too long, like someone had stretched a person on a rack. The skin looked waxy and see-through, and I could see dark veins underneath. But the worst part was how it moved. Its joints bent in directions that shouldn't be possible, like its bones were made of rubber. It looked directly at my car and made a sound, clicking and hissing noises that definitely weren't human. Then it called back into the caves, and more figures started coming out. Different sizes, but all the same basic wrong shape, all moving in that impossible, joint-bending way. I should have put my car in reverse and gotten out of there, but I was frozen, watching these things approach my car. The biggest one reached my driver's side window and tapped on it with fingers that were too long and had too many joints. Its face was almost human, but the proportions were off. Eyes too big, mouth too wide. Somehow I found the courage to roll down my window about 2 inches. The thing made more clicking sounds, then pointed to my back seat where all the food was. It wanted the delivery. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely open the car door, but I did. I started pulling out bags of food and setting them on the ground. The creatures, I don't know what else to call them, grabbed the raw meat immediately. They didn't cook it or prepare it. They just started eating it right there, tearing it apart with teeth that were too sharp and too pointed. Then they got to the live animals. I won't describe exactly what they did, but their mouths opened wider than any human mouth could, like a snake's jaw unhinging. The sounds the rabbits and chickens made will stay with me forever. These things ate everything: meat, bones, fur, feathers. making satisfied humming sounds like this was the best meal they'd had in months. While they were eating, I noticed human clothes scattered around the cave entrances. A UPS uniform, some work boots, a baseball cap. My stomach dropped as I realized what those might mean. The creatures finished eating and started moving around me in a circle. They were marking their territory, leaving sticky secretions on trees and rocks. The handprints I'd seen on the trail, those were their territorial markers. They had been claiming this entire forest as their hunting ground. They were communicating about me in their clicking language, studying me like they were trying to decide something. Was I food? Was I a threat? I was too scared to move, just standing there while these impossible things circled me like sharks. That's when I saw the cave paintings. The walls inside the nearest cave had drawings that looked ancient, crude figures hunting humans, dragging bodies into underground chambers. These things had been living under these mountains for who knows how long, hunting people, storing bodies. The food deliveries weren't just feeding them, they were keeping them fed so they wouldn't come into town looking for fresh meat. I realized I wasn't the first delivery driver to come out here. Those clothes by the caves, the fact that they knew exactly what to do when I showed up, this was a regular thing. How many drivers had they paid off with big tips to make these deliveries? How many hadn't made it back? The biggest creature approached me again and made more clicking sounds. Then, impossibly, it spoke. Its voice was wrong, like it was learning human speech from old recordings, but I could understand it. Food? Good. You? Return. Next week. Same time. It wasn't a question. It was an order. I nodded quickly and backed toward my car. The creatures watched me but didn't try to stop me. I got in, started the engine, and slowly drove back the way I'd come. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely steer. The trip back seemed to take forever. When I finally reached the main road and my phone got signal again, I had 17 missed calls from the restaurants asking about the delivery status. I marked it as completed and drove straight home. I tried to report what I'd seen. I called the police, but when I told them about the coordinates and the creatures, they said they'd look into it but never called back. I tried calling the health department about unsafe food handling, but they just transferred me around until I gave up. I went back to the restaurants where I'd picked up the order, hoping to get more information about who had set it up. But their records just showed a cash payment and a phone number that was disconnected when I tried calling it. 3 weeks later, I got another order. Same coordinates, same customer name, the family, same massive tip. I stared at my phone for 10 minutes before declining it, but someone else took it. Some other driver who needed the money, who thought a $200 tip was worth the risk. I wonder if they made it back. I still deliver food in eastern Tennessee. I still need the money. But now I pay attention to the orders differently. I check the addresses more carefully. I avoid anything that sends me too far into the woods. Because I know now that there are things living under these mountains, things that have been here longer than any of us, things that are smart enough to pay for food delivery to keep from hunting in town, smart enough to keep a steady supply of drivers coming to them. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving home from my last delivery, I see those red cloth strips tied to trees along the highway. Territory markers, reminders that I'm driving through their hunting ground. They're still out there, under Serpent Ridge, still getting their food delivered, still waiting for drivers who need the money bad enough to follow GPS coordinates into the deep woods. If you ever get an order for the family at some random coordinates in the Tennessee mountains, don't take it. The tip isn't worth it, trust me. Some deliveries aren't meant for the living. My name is Marcus Webb, and I've been working maintenance for Virginia State Parks for 12 years. I fix trails, clean campsites, and keep the parks safe for visitors. I've dealt with bear encounters, flash floods, and equipment failures in the middle of nowhere. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. But what happened last fall at Blackwood Hollow changed everything I thought I knew about being alone in the woods. The hollow had been closed for 2 years after 3 hikers went missing. All experienced outdoorsmen who knew the area well. Search teams found their cars in the parking lot, but no trace of the hikers themselves. The official report blamed sudden weather and rough terrain, but everyone who worked these parks whispered about something else, something wrong about that place. My supervisor, Dave, called me into his office on a gray October morning. "Marcus, we need Blackwood Hollow cleared and reopened by Christmas," he said, sliding a work order across his desk. 20 miles of trails, 6 campsites, 2 shelter structures. Storm damage from the past 2 years needs fixing before we can let visitors back in. I looked at the map. Blackwood Hollow sat deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, accessible only by an old fire road that wound through 15 miles of dense forest. No cell towers, no radio repeaters, just you, your truck, and whatever equipment you could haul in. "How long do I have?" I asked. 3 weeks. Park Service wants it done before the budget meeting. Dave leaned back in his chair. "Look, I know it's a big job for one person, but budget cuts mean we can't spare anyone else. You're our best maintenance worker. If anyone can handle it alone, it's you." I drove out the next morning in my F-250 maintenance truck, loaded with chainsaws, hand tools, camping gear, and enough supplies for a week. The fire road started normal enough, gravel and dirt winding through familiar Virginia forest. But after the first 5 miles, something changed. The trees grew thicker, older. Their branches stretched across the road like fingers, blocking out the sky until I was driving through green tunnels. My radio crackled with static, then went silent. The GPS on my dashboard showed my location for another mile, then just displayed signal lost. I'd worked remote sites before, but this felt different. The silence was complete. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no wind through the leaves. Just the rumble of my truck engine and the crunch of tires on gravel. Even my engine seemed quieter than normal, muffled by the thick canopy above. The road ended at a small clearing where the old ranger station stood. The building was boarded up but structurally sound. I set up my base camp there, sleeping bag in the back of my truck, portable camping stove on a folding table, tools organized in the truck bed. Everything neat and efficient, just like I'd done on dozens of remote jobs. I started work on the main trail the next morning. Storm damage was worse than expected. Fallen trees blocked the path every few hundred yards. Some were massive oaks that would take hours to clear with my chainsaw. Others were smaller birches and maples I could move with the winch on my truck. The work was hard but familiar. Cut the trunk into manageable sections, drag the pieces off the trail, stack them where they wouldn't roll back. I fell into a rhythm. Measure, mark, cut, move. The chainsaw's roar was the only sound in the forest. But when I returned to my camp that first evening, something was off. My folding table had been moved 3 feet to the left. Not flipped over or damaged, just relocated. Like someone had picked it up and set it down in a different spot. I checked around the camp, but found no footprints, no tire tracks. KS. No sign anyone had been there. Must have been the wind, I told myself. Or maybe I hadn't positioned the table as well as I remembered. The second day, I found my chainsaw moved from where I'd left it. I always set it on a specific stump when taking breaks. Blade facing away from the trail, safety engaged, gas cap tight. But I found it on a different stump 20 feet away, positioned exactly the same way. Same safety settings, same fuel level. Like someone had studied how I arranged it, then copied it perfectly. That evening, my camp had been rearranged again. The sleeping bag in my truck was rotated 180 degrees. My cooking supplies were reorganized in the exact same order, but in a different location. Everything clean and neat, just like I would have done it, but I hadn't touched any of it since morning. On the third day, I discovered the cairns. I was clearing fallen branches from the trail when I noticed them. Neat stacks of stones beside the path. 5 stones each, balanced perfectly. Nothing natural about their placement. Someone had built them deliberately. I counted 7 cairns along a half-mile stretch of trail. Each stack was identical. Same size stones, same height, same balance point. And on top of each one sat something of mine. My work gloves on the first, my thermos on the second, my truck keys on the third. My hands shook as I picked up the keys. I distinctly remembered leaving them in my truck's ignition. The thermos had been in my camp. The gloves should have been in my back pocket. I looked around the forest, listening for any sound of movement. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" No answer. Just that oppressive silence, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. I gathered my items and destroyed the cairns, scattering the stones into the woods. But the next morning, they were rebuilt. 7 perfect stacks with 7 different personal items on top. Items I was certain had been in my possession when I went to sleep. That's when I started seeing him. I was using the winch to drag a fallen oak off the trail, and I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Someone working about 100 yards deeper in the forest. Same work clothes as mine. Green Park Service uniform, yellow hard hat, safety vest. Same build and height. "Hey!" I shouted, shutting off the winch motor. "You with the Park Service?" The figure paused, looked in my direction, then walked deeper into the trees until I lost sight of him. I grabbed my tools and pushed through the undergrowth, following where I'd seen him go. No trail here, just thick forest floor covered in fallen leaves. But after 50 yards, I found fresh work. A fallen tree had been cut into sections and stacked neatly beside a stream. Professional work, clean cuts, proper technique. Exactly how I would have done it. But I'd never been to this part of the forest. I examined the cut wood closely. The chainsaw marks were identical to my saw's pattern. Same chain, same bar length, same cutting technique. Even the sawdust scattered around the worksite looked familiar. "What the hell?" I muttered, running my hand along the smooth cut surface. That's when I noticed footprints in the soft earth beside the stream. Boot prints that matched my own work boots exactly. Same tread pattern, same wear marks, same size. But the impressions were somehow wrong. Too deep in some places, too shallow in others. Like someone wearing my boots, but not walking quite right in them. I followed the prints until they led to what looked like a campsite. A small clearing with a fire ring, a flat area for sleeping, tools arranged on a fallen log. The setup was identical to my base camp back at the ranger station. Same blue camping stove, same folding chairs, same way of organizing gear. But this camp felt empty. Fake. Like a movie set built to look lived in but missing something essential. The fire ring had no ashes. The sleeping area had no real wear patterns. The tools were arranged perfectly but showed no signs of actual use. I picked up a hammer from the tool arrangement. It was exactly like mine. Same brand, same model, same scratches on the handle. But it felt wrong in my hand. The weight was off, the balance strange, like holding a copy of something familiar that wasn't quite right. A sound behind me made me spin around. Someone walking through the forest, footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. I caught a glimpse of green uniform through the trees, moving parallel to my position about 30 yards away. "Stop right there," I shouted, grabbing my radio from my belt. Dead static. No signal. No response. Not even the usual squelch when I keyed the mic. I pushed through the undergrowth, chasing the sound of footsteps. But every time I got close, the figure seemed to be further away. Always visible for just a moment before disappearing behind another tree or over a ridge. The chase led me in a wide circle back to the main trail, where I found more of my work completed. A section I'd planned to clear tomorrow was already done. Trees cut, debris removed, trail markers straightened. Professional quality work that would have taken me hours to complete. I checked my watch. I'd been gone from my original work site for less than 30 minutes. No way someone could have finished that much work in such a short time. Unless they'd known exactly what needed to be done and worked with perfect efficiency. That evening, I found a note stuck under my truck's windshield wiper. Written in my own handwriting. Trail Section 3 completed. Move to Section 7. Tools cleaned and stored. Marcus. I stared at the note, my heart pounding. I recognized my handwriting, my way of abbreviating words, even my habit of signing work notes with just my first name. But I hadn't written it. I'd been working Section 2 all day and hadn't touched Section 7. I walked to where Section 7 should be, following the trail map. Found another completed work site. More professional tree removal, more perfect technique. and another note pinned to a trail marker. Good work today. Site almost ready for reopening. Weather looks good tomorrow. Marcus. The handwriting was mine. The wording sounded like something I'd write, but I had no memory of being in this area, doing this work, or leaving this note. I drove back to my camp as the sun was setting, checking my mirrors constantly. Twice I saw headlights following me on the fire road, staying just far enough back to be visible but not identifiable. But when I stopped and waited, no vehicle appeared. At my camp, I found my sleeping bag arranged differently again. Not just moved, improved. Better positioned for drainage, more level ground, closer to my supplies. Like someone had studied my camping habits and made corrections. My tools were cleaned and organized more efficiently than I'd left them. My camp stove had been refueled. My water containers were filled from a source I hadn't found yet. Everything done exactly as I would have done it, but better. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me reach for my flashlight. The forest was too quiet, like it was waiting for something. And twice I could have sworn I heard my own voice in the distance, talking to someone I couldn't see. Morning brought the worst discovery yet. My truck was surrounded by handprints, dozens of them pressed against every window, every mirror, every metal surface, all the same size and shape as my own hands. But wrong somehow. The fingers were too long, the palms too narrow. The prints had left an oily residue that smelled like rust and spoiled meat. I tried to wipe them off with a rag, but the residue stayed. It had etched itself into the glass and metal like it was acidic. When I looked closely, I could see my own fingerprint patterns in the marks, but distorted, stretched. Like someone had copied my prints but didn't understand how human hands were supposed to look. That's when I realized what was happening. Something had been watching me, studying me, learning how I moved, how I worked, how I organized my life. It was copying me, but not perfectly. Like an artist trying to paint a portrait from memory, getting most details right, but missing the subtle things that made it real. The disappeared hikers, the closed hollow. It had done this before. I started my truck and drove deeper into the forest, following work sites I hadn't created. Each one showed more of my techniques, my preferences, my habits, but also showed the thing learning, getting better at being me. At the furthest site, I found evidence of its other victims. Personal items arranged in shrine-like displays. Driver's licenses, wedding rings, family photos. Names I recognized from missing person reports over the years. The thing collected identities like trophies, storing them for later use. And in the center of the display was an empty spot, just the right size for my Park Service ID badge. I heard my truck engine start behind me. I spun around to see myself sitting in the driver's seat. Same uniform, same face, same everything. But the eyes were wrong. Too bright, too eager. And the smile was too wide for human muscles. The thing wearing my face waved at me with my own hand, then drove away in my truck. I was stranded 20 miles from the main road with no vehicle, no radio, and something that could perfectly impersonate me heading toward civilization. It would go to my job, my apartment, my life, and no one would know the difference until it was too late. I ran after the truck, following the fire road on foot. But after an hour, I had to accept I'd never catch up. The thing had won. It had studied me long enough to replace me completely. But as I walked, I noticed something. The truck's engine sounded wrong. Not quite the right pitch, missing the small knock my engine had developed last month. And the tire tracks in the dirt were too perfect, too evenly spaced, like the thing understood how trucks worked, but had never actually driven one with years of accumulated quirks and problems. It was good at copying, but it wasn't perfect. Not yet. I found an old maintenance shed I'd missed in my initial survey. Inside were tools, supplies, and an ancient radio that still had partial power. I managed to reach a ranger station 50 miles away, though the signal was weak and full of static. "This is Marcus Webb, Parks Maintenance," I said into the microphone. "I need immediate assistance at Blackwood Hollow. There's been an incident." The response crackled through static. "Marcus? We just got a call from you 20 minutes ago. You said you were done with the job and heading back to town." My blood went cold. "No, that wasn't me. Listen carefully. Do not trust whoever you talk to. It's not human. It's something else wearing my face. Long pause. Then, Marcus, are you feeling all right? You sound different. Because I'm the real one, I shouted into the radio. Test me. Ask me something only the real Marcus would know. But the radio went dead. The power finally gave out, leaving me alone in the dark shed with the growing realization that no one would believe me. The thing was already out there, living my life, and I was just a crazy man in the woods, talking about monsters. I hiked out of Blackwood Hollow over the next 2 days, following deer paths and old logging roads. When I finally reached civilization, I learned that Marcus Webb had already reported in, finished the job, and requested a transfer to a different district. Clean record, good performance review, no problems noted. The thing had thought of everything. I tried to go home, but the thing was living in my apartment. I tried to go to work, but the thing already had my job. I tried to contact friends, but they'd already been talking to the thing for days and couldn't understand why I was acting so weird and paranoid. So I disappeared, changed my name, moved across the country, started over in a different line of work. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I really escaped, or if I'm just another copy that thinks it's the original, walking around with borrowed memories of a life that was never really mine. The real test came last month. I was working construction in Arizona when I got a call from my old supervisor, Dave. "Marcus," he said, "where are you, man? You disappeared without notice 6 months ago. Just left your truck in the parking lot and never came back." According to him, the thing wearing my face had only lasted a few weeks before it started acting strange. Too perfect at the job, too efficient, too emotionally flat. Other workers noticed it didn't tell the same stories, didn't have the same reactions to things. Eventually, it just stopped showing up. Dave said they found my truck with all my gear still in it, arranged too neatly to be natural, and in the glove compartment was a note in my handwriting. "The job is complete. Moving on to new territory. Marcus." But I never wrote that note, and I never went back to that truck. Which means there are now 2 of us out there somewhere. The original me and the copy that learned to be me. And I'm honestly not sure which one I am anymore. All I know is that if you're ever working alone in remote areas, pay attention to the small things. Your equipment moved just slightly. Your work completed when you weren't there. Your own face looking back at you from the tree line. Because something is always watching, always learning, always getting better at being you. And once it's learned enough, you might not be necessary anymore. My name is Dave Hutchins, and I've been delivering propane tanks across West Virginia for 15 years. Started when I was 26, fresh out of the Army, looking for steady work that kept me outdoors. I've driven through every holler, up every mountain road, and delivered to some of the strangest places you can imagine. Remote cabins, hunting camps, off-grid homesteads where people live like it's still 1950. I've seen it all, or so I thought. I work for Mountain State Propane, family-owned business that's been around since the 70s. We service everything from suburban grills to industrial heating systems. My route covers the eastern counties, all the way out to the state line. It's good work, decent pay, my own truck, flexible schedule. The customers pay cash most of the time, especially the rural ones who don't trust banks or credit cards. I've handled emergency deliveries during blizzards, fixed leaky connections in the middle of nowhere, and helped customers who ran out of gas during the coldest nights of winter. Never missed a delivery in 15 years, never backed down from a job, no matter how remote or difficult the location. My supervisor, Tom, always said I was the guy he could count on when nobody else would take the run. But what happened last winter in a place called Devil's Backbone changed everything I thought I knew about my job, and about what lives in the deep woods of West Virginia. It all started in November when Tom handed me a new customer file. No name, just coordinates and a post office box for billing. They wanted 6 large propane tanks delivered every month, always paying in advance. Cash only, left in a hollow oak tree at the start of their property line. The delivery point was 18 miles into the forest on an old logging road that most maps don't even show anymore. The instructions were specific. Deliver at sunset, never stay. After dark, leave the tanks on the concrete pad next to the metal shed. Simple enough, except for the location. Devil's Backbone is what locals call a ridge that runs along the border with Virginia. Dense forest, no cell towers, no houses for miles in any direction. The kind of place that makes you wonder why anyone would want to live there. My first delivery was on a cold Tuesday in late November. The customer had left exact directions. Take Route 9 east to Millers Creek Road, follow it 12 miles to the rusted mailbox with no name, then turn left onto the unmarked gravel road. From there, it was 6 miles to a wooden gate, then another 12 miles through the forest to the clearing. The road was worse than I expected. My truck bounced and scraped along ruts that hadn't been maintained in years. Tree branches scratched the sides of the cab. The forest got thicker the deeper I went until I needed headlights, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. The canopy was so dense it blocked out the sky completely. No cell service, of course. My GPS stopped working about 5 miles in, just showing a blank screen where the road should be. I had to follow the handwritten directions, looking for landmarks like the lightning split hickory and the rock pile shaped like a church. Old-school navigation that truckers used before satellites. When I finally reached the clearing, I understood why they wanted delivery at sunset. The place felt wrong in full daylight, like it wasn't meant to be seen clearly. There was a concrete pad about 20 feet square, cracked and stained with age. Next to it stood a metal storage shed, windowless and padlocked. The whole area was maybe 50 yards across, surrounded by trees so thick they formed walls. But it was the markers that really bothered me. Stone cairns, each about 3 feet high, placed around the edge of the clearing like some kind of boundary. Red cloth strips hung from the surrounding trees, dozens of them, fluttering in the wind. They looked fresh, like someone had just put them up. I unloaded the tanks as fast as I could. The place gave me the creeps, though I couldn't say exactly why. Maybe it was how quiet everything was. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees. Just silence, so complete it made my ears ring. I'd been in remote places before, but this felt different. This felt like something was watching. The handprints didn't help my nerves either. They were everywhere. On the shed door, on the concrete pad, even on the side of my truck after I'd been there for 10 minutes. At first glance, they looked human, but something was off about them. The fingers were too long, with too many joints. The thumbs bent the wrong way, and they were fresh, like whatever made them had been there recently. I finished the delivery and got out of there as fast as the logging road would allow. Told myself it was just another strange customer in a strange location. Mountain people had their own ways of doing things, and it wasn't my job to understand them. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me the entire time. December's delivery was worse. Same routine, same location, but now the handprints covered every surface. They were on trees, on rocks, even pressed into the mud around the clearing. Some were small, others huge, all with that wrong anatomy that made my skin crawl. The red cloth strips had multiplied too, hanging like Christmas decorations from hell. That's when I started noticing the tracks. Multiple sets pressed into the soft earth around the pad. They looked human at first glance. 5 toes, heel impression, roughly the right size. But the stride was all wrong, too long for a normal person. And there were claw marks at the tip of each toe, like fingernails dragged through mud. The tracks showed patterns too. Not random wandering, but organized movement. Lines and circles like military formations. Whatever was making these tracks was coordinate. Intelligent. They were using the clearing as a meeting place, gathering here regularly. I found bones too, lots of them, scattered in organized piles around the edge of the clearing, sorted by size and type. Deer bones, smaller animals, birds, all picked clean and arranged with disturbing precision. This wasn't natural predation, this was systematic. The worst part was realizing I wasn't alone during the delivery. I kept seeing movement in the forest, shapes flitting between the trees just at the edge of my vision. Never clear enough to identify, but definitely there. Watching, learning my routine. I started timing how long I spent in the clearing. 15 minutes to unload 6 tanks, arrange them on the pad, and get back to the truck. 15 minutes during which I was completely exposed. completely vulnerable. And every month, I felt more eyes on me. The sounds started in January. Clicking noises from the forest, like someone snapping their fingers, but deeper, more resonant. Whistles too, not like birds, but like people signaling to each other. Communication, coordination. Whatever was out there was talking, planning. I began to understand the customer's instructions about not staying after dark. Whatever lived in these woods was more active at night. The delivery timing wasn't just convenient, it was survival. The February delivery almost made me quit. I arrived to find the clearing full of evidence from a recent kill. Fresh blood on the concrete, drag marks through the mud, scattered fur and feathers. But it wasn't random carnage. Everything was arranged, organized. The bones were sorted and placed in specific patterns. This was ritual behavior. The tracks showed it too. Multiple sets converging on the clearing, evidence of coordinated hunting. Whatever these things were, they were pack hunters with human-level intelligence. They were using tools, setting traps, working together to bring down prey. And they were getting bolder. The movement in the forest was closer now, more obvious. I could see shapes between the trees, pale figures that moved. Wrong, heads tilted at unnatural angles. They were studying me, learning my patterns, timing my arrivals. That's when I realized the truth. My delivery schedule wasn't just convenient for the customer. These things were using it to time their hunts. They knew when I was coming, knew the clearing would be empty afterward. They were using my route as part of their hunting strategy. March changed everything. I arrived at sunset as usual, truck loaded with 6 fresh tanks. But as I pulled into the clearing, I saw them. 6 creatures feeding on something in the center of the concrete pad. They looked almost human from a distance, but wrong in every detail that mattered. Pale skin stretched tight over elongated bones, arms and legs too long for their bodies, heads that turned too far, eyes that reflected light like an animal's. They moved like wolves, but had intelligence in their gaze. When they saw my truck, they didn't flee. They didn't even seem surprised. Instead, they began moving to surround me. I sat frozen in the cab as they circled my truck with deliberate coordination. These weren't mindless beasts. They were smart, organized, and they'd been planning this. The months of watching, learning, timing, it had all led to this moment. One of them approached the driver's side window. Up close, I could see it had once been human, or something like human, but changed, twisted, evolved into something that belonged in nightmares. Its fingers ended in claws that scraped against the glass. Its mouth opened to reveal too many teeth. It made the clicking sound I'd heard before, and the others responded. They were communicating, coordinating their next move. I realized they could have taken me any time in the past months. They'd chosen not to, chosen to study me instead, learn my habits, my schedule, my vulnerabilities. Now they were ready. I gunned the engine and crashed through, their formation bouncing off trees and rocks as I fled down the logging road. My truck took damage, but it got me out. In my mirror, I could see them watching me go, not chasing, but making note of my escape route. I never went back to that clearing. Told Tom the road was washed out, customer unreachable. He grumbled about lost revenue, but assigned the route to someone else. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. Who would believe it? But I did some research afterward. Devil's Backbone has a history. Logging crews disappeared there in the 1920s. Hunting parties went missing in the 50s and 60s. Local tribes had stories about the place, warnings about things that lived in the deep woods and only came out at night. The new driver lasted 2 deliveries before he quit. Wouldn't say why, just turned in his keys and walked out. Tom tried 3 more drivers after that. None of them lasted a month. The customer still orders their propane, still pays in advance, cash in the tree hollow. But Mountain State Propane doesn't service that route anymore. We've written it off as inaccessible. I still drive delivery routes across West Virginia, still serve the remote customers who pay cash and live off the grid. But I'm more careful now about delivery times, more aware of what might be watching from the forest. And I never, ever deliver after sunset. Some places are meant to stay wild. Some customers aren't worth the risk. And some things are better left alone in the deep woods, far from civilization and human understanding. But sometimes, on clear nights when the wind is right, I can still hear those clicking sounds echoing across the mountains. They're still out there, still hunting, still organized. And I know they remember the delivery driver who got away. My name is Tony Martinez, and I've been pumping septic tanks across rural Kentucky for 15 years. Started this business when I was 22, right after my dad's heart attack forced him to retire from the same work. I've seen every kind of mess you can imagine. Backed up systems, broken pipes, tanks that haven't been serviced in decades. I've crawled under houses in 3 feet of mud and worked Christmas morning for emergency calls. But nothing in all those years prepared me for what I found at that compound in Screaming Hollow back in October. I drive a custom-built truck with a 3,000-gallon vacuum tank and all the gear you need for this kind of work. Hoses, pumps, cameras for line inspections, chemical treatments, everything built to handle the worst situations. My truck has pulled me out of more tight spots than I can count, and I take pride in being the guy who shows up when everyone else says it can't be done. That reputation is what got me the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning around 8 when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, and the voice on the other end was shaky, nervous. Said his name was Marcus, and that they had a major backup situation at their property. Multiple buildings, he said, and it was getting bad fast. Health emergency, he called it. We're about 25 miles east of town, Marcus told me. Up in the mountains. I know it's far, but we'll pay triple your usual rate if you can get here today. Triple rate was serious money, and I had bills to pay like everyone else. But something about the way he talked bothered me. He kept saying we and they, but wouldn't give me straight answers about how many people lived there or what kind of buildings we were talking about. When I asked for the exact address, he gave me a bunch of directions instead. Turn here, follow this road, look for retails, demarkers. GPS won't work out here, he said. Too remote, but I'll text you the directions and you can't miss us. We're the only place for miles. The directions he texted were hand-drawn on a phone photo. Rough sketches of roads and landmarks with notes like, bear left at Big Oak Tree and follow dirt road 3 miles past creek. It looked like something from 50 years ago, not the kind of thing you'd expect in 2024. But triple rate was triple rate, and I've serviced plenty of remote properties. I loaded up my truck with extra hoses and headed out. The first 10 miles were normal enough. County roads I'd driven before, passing farms and small houses. But as I got deeper into the mountains, the roads got narrower and more overgrown. Trees pressed in from both sides, creating green tunnels that blocked out most of the sunlight. My GPS started acting up around mile 15, losing signal and then showing me in completely wrong locations. I had to navigate by compass and those hand-drawn directions, checking my phone every few minutes for the photos Marcus had sent. The roads kept splitting and turning, and more than once I had to backtrack when I realized I'd taken a wrong turn. The deeper I went, the more isolated it felt. No power lines, no cell towers, no signs of civilization at all. After almost 2 hours of driving, I finally spotted the red cloth strips Marcus had mentioned. They were tied to trees along a dirt road that was barely wide enough for my truck. The strips looked old and faded, like they'd been there for years. I followed them for another mile until I reached a clearing in the forest. What I saw didn't make sense. There were 6 or 7 buildings scattered around the clearing. Some looked like cabins, others more like workshops or storage buildings. But the septic systems were massive. I'm talking about tank setups designed for hundreds of people. Not the handful of residents I could see moving around between the buildings. The people themselves were strange too. They watched me from a distance but never came close or tried to talk to me. When I waved, they just stared. A few of them were placing stones in careful stacks around the buildings. Cairns, I guess you'd call them. Perfectly balanced rocks piled up like markers or warnings. "You must be Tony," a voice said behind me. I turned and saw a thin man in his 50s walking toward me. He had the same nervous energy I'd heard in his voice on the phone. "Marcus?" I asked. He nodded. "Thanks for coming out. I know it's a long drive." "These septic systems are huge," I said, pointing to the tank covers I could see. "How many people live here?" "It varies," he said, not really answering. Sometimes more, sometimes less. We just need the systems pumped and cleaned. All of them. That should have been my first warning. In 15 years of this work, I've never had a customer who couldn't tell me how many people use their septic system. But Marcus was paying triple rate, and I was already there. I started with the tank closest to the main building. The moment I lifted the cover, I knew something was wrong. The smell that hit me wasn't just normal septic waste. There was a chemical odor mixed with something rotten and organic that I'd never encountered before. I lowered my inspection camera into the tank to check the levels and condition. What I saw on the screen made me step back. There were bones in the tank, not chicken bones or food scraps, but larger bones with what looked like teeth marks on them. And the waste itself was wrong. It contained materials that definitely weren't from normal human use. "Marcus," I called out, but when I looked around, he was gone. The other residents were still watching me from their positions around the clearing, but none of them would come close. I tried to focus on the job. Maybe it was animal waste mixed in, or maybe they were disposing of hunting remains through the septic system. It wasn't legal, but I do seen stranger things. I started up my vacuum pump and began the extraction process. That's when I felt the first vibration. It came through the ground under my feet, like heavy machinery running somewhere below. But there was no machinery visible anywhere in the compound. The vibration had a rhythm to it, almost like something large moving through underground tunnels. As I pumped out the first tank, I noticed something else disturbing. The waste level wasn't dropping the way it should. It was like the tank was connected to something much larger underground, and as fast as I pumped it out, more waste flowed in from somewhere else. I walked around the compound, checking the other tank covers. Every septic system showed the same massive capacity, and they were all connected by pipes that disappeared into the ground in directions that didn't make sense. Instead of leading to a drain field, the pipes seemed to head straight down into the mountain. That's when I realized I wasn't looking at a normal septic system at all. These tanks were feeding into natural cave systems under the mountains, and from the sounds coming up through the pipes, something was living down there. I heard scratching noises, clicking sounds, and what sounded like multiple voices communicating in ways that weren't quite human. The residents weren't just using these tanks for waste disposal. They were feeding something that lived in the caves below. I found evidence of the real purpose when I moved to the third tank. Personal belongings were mixed in with the organic waste: wallets, jewelry, pieces of clothing. And the bones I kept seeing weren't from animals. They were human bones, processed and broken down, but still recognizable. This wasn't a waste management system. It was a body disposal operation. The compound residents were either feeding the creatures below or being forced to do it. Every few minutes, I'd see one of them approaching a tank with what looked like offerings: bags of organic matter, personal items, things that looked suspiciously like body parts. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal at all. The radio in my truck was picking up nothing but static. The isolation that had seemed inconvenient earlier now felt like a trap. As I continued working, trying to act normal while figuring out how to get out of there, I found stone carvings around some of the older tank installations. Symbols that looked ancient, spirals and triangles carved into rock that had been there long before the modern septic systems were built. This feeding arrangement was old, maybe centuries old. The septic tanks were just the modern version of something that had been going on in these mountains for generations. The ground vibrations were getting stronger, and I could hear movement throughout the entire underground system. Whatever lived in those caves wasn't isolated to one small area. This was a vast network stretching for miles under the mountain, and I was servicing the feeding operation for an entire underground civilization. I watched from behind my truck as residents brought more offerings to the tanks. Fresh organic matter disappeared into the system, and within minutes I could hear activity from below. Sounds of feeding, communication, movement through the tunnels. These things down there were intelligent. They had maintained this arrangement with the surface dwellers, probably for decades. The compound provided them with food and disposal services for their victims, and in return, the creatures allowed the residents to live. But I was an outsider. I had seen too much. The ground under my feet suddenly erupted as something large burst through the surface near one of the tanks. I caught a glimpse of pale, segmented flesh and too many limbs before I ran for my truck. Behind me, I could hear more of them emerging from the underground network, moving through the compound with purpose. I gunned the engine and raced back down that narrow dirt road, following those red cloth markers in reverse while things crashed through the forest behind me. My truck's rear cameras showed shapes keeping pace through the trees. Things that moved too fast and in ways that hurt to watch. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main highway. It took me 3 hours to get back to town, and by the time I got there, I was shaking so hard I could barely hold my keys. I never filed a report. Who would believe it? Instead, I told people the job was completed normally and the customers paid in cash. But I kept checking the news for missing person reports in that area. Over the next few months, I found dozens of them going back years. Hikers, campers, hunters, all disappeared without a trace in the same general area. I still pump septic tanks, but I don't take calls from unfamiliar numbers anymore. And I never work alone in remote areas, no matter how much money they offer. Because now I know that some waste management systems aren't designed to handle human waste. They're designed to feed the things that hunt humans. And somewhere under those Kentucky mountains, they're still feeding